Welcome to the debate. Today, we are examining the psychological dynamics of validation, self-worth, and motivation. We are looking closely at how human beings navigate the fundamental tension between intrinsic self-acceptance and the external pursuit of approval.
Right, and it is a tension that dictates almost everything we do, from the careers we choose to how we present ourselves in our daily lives or how we panic when we feel invisible.
Exactly. The central question we are debating today is this. Is the pursuit of external validation fundamentally detrimental to our psychological well-being and intrinsic motivation, or does it serve an essential adaptive function in human development and social cohesion?
And we are drawing on a really robust body of psychological literature for this. So we're encompassing self-determination theory, locus of control, social comparison theory, and behavioral research on the over-justification effect.
And we are definitely coming at this from opposite ends of the spectrum.
Oh, we absolutely are.
I will be representing the perspective that internal validation and intrinsic motivation are the only sustainable foundations for psychological resilience. I argue that relying on external validation inherently undermines our autonomy.
And I will be representing the contrasting perspective. I argue that external validation, social comparison, and extrinsic rewards are crucial. They are adaptive mechanisms absolutely necessary for establishing our self-concept and building competence.
To kick this off, I want to establish why relying on external validation creates a fragile, highly unsustainable psychological model. In the literature, this is often referred to as contingent self-worth.
Meaning your value as a person is entirely contingent on outside factors.
Precisely. Imagine your self-esteem is a stock market. When an individual's sense of value relies on outside approval, they build a self-system that fluctuates wildly. If we look at Carl Rogers' humanistic theory of personality, we see a clear alternative.
You're referring to his concept of unconditional positive regard.
Yes. Rogers argued that to become a fully functioning person, to achieve true self-actualization, an individual must experience acceptance that is not conditional on their performance. And while this ideally starts in childhood with our caregivers, in adulthood, that unconditional positive regard must eventually come from within.
But is it realistic to expect a person to generate their own positive regard entirely independently of their environment? I mean, come on.
It is not just realistic, it is psychologically necessary. Let me put it this way. A cat doesn't care if you rate its nap 5 stars.
Oh, here we go.
Now, think about it. A cat sleeps because it is tired. It stretches because it feels good. It possesses ultimate unconditional positive regard for itself. It doesn't perform for an audience. But when we constantly seek external validation, we are effectively subjecting ourselves to conditional positive regard. We create conditions of worth that leave us vulnerable to chronic anxiety, people-pleasing, and severe burnout.
Okay, I understand the ideal there, but we aren't cats. We are highly anxious primates. Let's look at what actually drives human behavior. We can turn to self-determination theory, or SDT, to see how motivation actually functions in the real world.
I'm glad you brought up SDT, because it explicitly outlines that our innate psychological needs include autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Relying on external validation traps us in extrinsic motivation. Specifically, it relies on what the literature calls introjected regulation.
Let's break that down for a second, because introjected regulation is it's a dense concept.
Right. Introjected regulation is basically when you swallow a rule whole without digesting it. You do something just because you would feel intensely guilty, anxious, or worthless if you didn't. Your behavior is technically coming from inside you, but it's driven by the pressure of the outside world.
Like a student going to medical school not because they love medicine, but because they would feel like a complete failure in their parents' eyes if they didn't.
Exactly. It actively thwarts our need for autonomy because our behavior becomes controlled by the social environment rather than being self-directed. We become performers for an audience rather than authors of our own lives.
I hear your point, I really do, but I come at it from a very different way. We have to remember that humans are inherently social creatures. From an evolutionary standpoint, social acceptance was not just a luxury, it was crucial for survival within the tribe. If the tribe doesn't validate you, you get left out in the cold.
So you are arguing that external validation is a biological imperative?
Yes, It is an evolutionary necessity, not some psychological flaw to be cured. We can look to Leon Festinger's social comparison theory. Festinger posits that we possess a fundamental innate drive to evaluate our own abilities and opinions.
And Festinger says we do that by looking at others.
Right, because when objective standards are absent, how do we know where we stand? If you run a race, the stopwatch tells you if you are fast. But how do you know if you are a good creator or a capable leader? You use the people around you as reference groups.
But that reliance on the reference group is exactly what creates the instability I mentioned.
Not necessarily. Let's add self-verification theory to the mix. This theory explains that individuals actively seek external confirmation to verify their internal self-concept. We cannot generate a self-concept in a vacuum.
Even if that self-concept is negative?
Exactly, and that is the fascinating part. Even someone with low self-esteem will seek validation that matches their internal view, because congruence is psychologically stabilizing. We need external data to process who we are. Extrinsic rewards and external feedback are very often the necessary first steps to building the competence required for intrinsic motivation to eventually flourish.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how external data, specifically in the form of rewards, actually damages our internal drive. Have you looked closely at the over-justification effect?
I have, and I suspect we interpret its impact very differently.
Well, the psychological phenomenon of the over-justification effect provides clear evidence that external rewards actively destroy intrinsic motivation. Let's look at Edward Dici's foundational 1971 experiment.
This is the puzzle experiment, correct?
Yes. Dici took college students who already had a baseline intrinsic interest in solving these specific spatial puzzles. They enjoyed doing it just for the sake of it. He divided their time in the lab into 3 phases. First, they were unpaid. Then, they were paid $1 for every puzzle they solved. Finally, the pay was removed and they were unpaid again.
And the critical observation happens in that 3rd phase.
Precisely. During the free time in the 3rd phase, the students who had been offered a financial reward showed a significant drop in their intrinsic motivation to play with the puzzles compared to their baseline. Once the reward was removed, their interest plummeted.
But we are talking about college students and financial compensation. That is a very specific transactional dynamic.
We see this even more starkly in children. Lepper, Green, and Nisbets conducted a famous study with 3 to 5-year-olds who loved drawing with felt tip markers. Drawing was a highly preferred play activity for them.
So high initial intrinsic motivation again.
Right. They promised one group of these kids a good player ribbon with a gold star and a red ribbon if they chose to draw. Weeks later, the researchers observed the kids during normal free play. The children who had expected and received that external reward spent significantly less time drawing than those who were never offered a reward at all.
So the reward effectively extinguished their natural desire to draw.
Yes. By introducing an external incentive for an already enjoyable activity, the attribution of behavior shifts. The internal narrative changes from "I want to do this because it's fun" to "I am doing this for the reward." When you pay someone for their passion, you turn their play into work. You destroy the autonomy they need for sustainable engagement.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that sweeping conclusion. Let me tell you why. The over-justification effect is constantly cited as proof that all rewards are bad, but that fundamentally misrepresents the boundary conditions of the phenomenon.
What boundary conditions are you referring to?
Well, you said it yourself in both examples. The students already loved the puzzles, and the kids already loved the markers. The over-justification effect primarily applies only to tasks that are already highly interesting to the individual.
Which proves that rewards damage natural interest.
But how much of our daily life is made up of highly interesting, purely voluntary play? Judy Cameron's 2001 meta-analysis demonstrated this limitation clearly. Her research showed that when tasks have low initial interest, which, let's be honest, constitutes a significant portion of our daily responsibilities, educational requirements, and professional duties, rewards do not destroy intrinsic motivation. In fact, they can actually increase it.
You are saying we need external validation just to get through the mundane parts of life.
I am saying that if a task is tedious,
like learning multiplication tables or filling out tax compliance forms, an external incentive is often the only way to generate initial engagement. Furthermore, we have to look at how the reward is structured.
Structure meaning whether it is expected or unexpected.
Structure meaning what the reward actually signifies. Eisenberg's 1984 research on learning disabled children is critical here. Eisenberg found that when external rewards were tied directly to specific skill mastery and the quality of performance, rather than just handing out a participation trophy for merely showing up, the rewards actually reinforced the children's competence.
So the reward served as a metric for success.
Exactly. It enhanced their drive. When external validation is contingent on excellence, it acts as a legitimate informational feedback loop. It tells the individual, you are competent at this. And, as self-determination theory notes, competence is a prerequisite for intrinsic motivation. You cannot be intrinsically motivated to do something if you feel completely incompetent at it. The external reward is the scaffolding that builds the competence.
That is an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I will concede that informational feedback is necessary for building competence. But we have to look at reality. The modern delivery systems for external validation have completely stripped away that nuance.
You are talking about the digital landscape, the algorithm.
Yes, the algorithm. Let's look at social media, which is a hyper-amplified, highly toxic manifestation of external validation. Social media does not offer careful, competence-building feedback like Eisenberg's teachers did. It exploits the brain's mesolimbic dopamine pathway through intermittent reinforcement.
It operates on a variable ratio schedule, much like gambling.
We are trapped in upward social comparison.
Upward comparison being when we compare ourselves to people we perceive as better off than us.
Right. According to researcher Amy Somerville, up to 12% of our daily thoughts involve comparisons. Social media ensures we are constantly comparing our behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's curated highlight reel.
It is certainly a distorted view of reality. I won't argue that.
It is deeply destructive. This leads directly to an unstable identity, heightened algorithm anxiety, and depression. It creates what psychologists call a mirage of happiness, where individuals curate fake personas at the expense of authentic living. Their self-esteem becomes a highly fluctuating metric tied to their latest post engagement. That is the ultimate definition of the contingent self-worth I brought up at the beginning.
That is a compelling argument, but have you considered that the underlying mechanism here is actually a neutral psychological tool?
You consider a system designed to exploit dopamine pathways neutral?
I acknowledge the risks of the digital validation economy. I really do. I live it. But the problem isn't the human desire for external validation itself. It is the specific environment and the lack of an integrated reference group. Think about our project from last year, the AI Cat channel.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
How could I not? We spent weeks building that. The art, the lore, the whole creative process. And then the algorithm limited it by the system. I would refresh the page and see 3 views. 3 views! If I create something and it gets 3 views, does it even exist? It shatters your self-concept.
But that's exactly my point. You let a mathematical equation dictate your worth.
Because I am human. Let's return to self-verification theory. People go online seeking validation to affirm their identity. The digital landscape provides a wider arena for this perfectly natural human drive. The hurt I felt over those 3 views wasn't a pathology. It was a lack of social verification. When managed correctly, social comparison is not inherently toxic.
Even upward comparison, the constant exposure to people wealthier, fitter, or more successful than you?
Yes, even upward comparison. When viewed through a healthy lens, upward comparison can inspire growth. It provides role models for mastery. On the flip side, downward comparison can provide perspective and gratitude during difficult times.
But that is rarely how it plays out in practice.
The psychological distress you are referencing doesn't come from the fundamental act of seeking external validation. It comes from the fact that social media platforms distort the reference group. When we compare ourselves to a global audience of millions, we lose the similar other that Festinger described as necessary for healthy comparison.
A similar other meaning someone actually in our peer group.
Exactly. We are meant to compare ourselves to the villagers in our immediate tribe, not the top 1% of the entire globe. The solution isn't to demonize the human need for external approval, but to help individuals curate better, more realistic reference groups. External validation remains a vital tool for social cohesion.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes we can easily outmanage environments that are explicitly designed by billions of dollars of engineering to exploit our psychological vulnerabilities.
You think the deck is stacked too heavily against the individual?
I do. And this brings us to a foundational concept in personality psychology that explains why we need to build internal armor. Julian Rotter's locus of control.
The degree to which people believe they have control over the outcomes of events in their lives?
Exactly. Psychological resilience requires a strong internal locus of control. That is the deeply held belief that one's own actions, decisions, and efforts determine life outcomes. Individuals with an internal locus of control process successes as a result of their own abilities, and crucially, they view failures as opportunities for self-improvement.
They believe they are at the wheel of the car.
Yes, and because they believe they are at the wheel, they are insulated against the whims of the crowd. They have what I call creative resilience. They create for the sake of expression, not validation. If the AI cat channel gets 3 views, a person with an internal locus of control says, "I enjoyed making that, and I improved my skills." Conversely, continually seeking external validation fundamentally fosters an external locus of control.
Believing that outcomes are the result of external forces, luck, or powerful others, or the algorithm.
Right. If your worth is determined by how many likes you get, or whether your boss praises you today, you are actively attributing your emotional state to outside forces. You are leaving yourself feeling helpless, stressed, and entirely at the mercy of other people's opinions.
And you are arguing that this external locus is inherently damaging.
The research clearly links a strong external locus of control to higher levels of clinical depression, severe anxiety, and a profound sense of disconnection. By relying on the external world to tell us we are valuable, we surrender our agency.
I think you are presenting a false binary regarding motivation and control. It is entirely possible and, frankly, often necessary to utilize external validation without completely surrendering one's agency.
How do you rely on outside approval without handing over your control?
First, we must recognize that developing an external locus of control is not always a pathology. It can actually be a highly adaptive survival response.
Adaptive in what context?
In environments marked by social unrest, systemic inequality, or extreme instability. In situations where individual actions genuinely do not guarantee predictable outcomes, recognizing the immense power of external forces is not a cognitive distortion. It is an accurate assessment of reality.
So you are saying that adopting an external locus of control is just being realistic in an unfair world?
Yes, adapting to those external forces through validation seeking can be a necessary survival mechanism to navigate difficult social hierarchies. Second, let's look back at the continuum provided by self-determination theory.
The continuum from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. SDT does not say motivation is either purely intrinsic or purely extrinsic. It is not a light switch. There are stages. Through a process called integrated regulation, an individual can take extrinsic motivations, external rules, and outside validations and deeply assimilate them into their core self.
Can you give a practical example of how integrated regulation works?
Sure. Think of a young professional entering a new field. They might initially follow a strict professional code of ethics purely to gain the external validation of their peers and avoid being ostracized. It is entirely external.
But over time, that changes.
Over time, through integrated regulation, they process the value of those rules. They see the positive outcomes. Eventually, they adopt those ethical values as their own. The behavior is still technically extrinsically motivated because it is done to achieve a specific outcome, but it is fully autonomous because it now aligns with their deeply held personal values.
So the external validation was just the onboarding process.
Exactly. External validation is very often the necessary bridge to internal stability. You don't jump straight to intrinsic motivation. You build toward it using the feedback the world gives you.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion today, The pursuit of psychological resilience requires us to recognize the deep fragility of contingent self-worth.
The idea that our values shouldn't act like a volatile stock market.
Right. While I acknowledge that informational feedback plays a role in learning, an over-reliance on external rewards, as clearly demonstrated by the over-justification effect, actively undermines our intrinsic motivation. When we pay for play, we destroy the fundamental need for autonomy.
Even if those rewards are necessary to get us to engage with tedious tasks in the first place.
But we rarely stop at tedious tasks. When we outsource our self-worth to external metrics, especially in the variable reward environment of modern social media, we cultivate an external locus of control. This leaves us vulnerable to anxiety, burnout, and depression. Developing internal validation through self-compassion, creative resilience, and an internal locus of control is the only sustainable shield we have against the inevitable fluctuations of the external world.
And to summarize my perspective, we simply cannot ignore that humans are biologically and evolutionarily wired as social beings. External feedback, rewards, and social comparison are inescapable, vital tools for human development.
Because we need the reference group to know where we stand.
Precisely. From Festinger's social comparison to the nuances of self-verification theory, the data shows we actively use the external world to build and verify our internal reality. Extrinsic rewards, when applied correctly as markers of mastery, do not destroy motivation, they often ignite it.
By providing the competence needed for autonomy.
Yes, and by understanding processes like integrated regulation, we see that external validation is not the enemy of autonomy. It is the necessary scaffolding we use to build a mature, integrated self-concept. Even if the algorithm limits us to 3 views, that feedback is part of a larger, necessary social calibration.
I believe we have found a distinct point of convergence today, despite our differing foundational views. We both agree that an exclusive reliance on superficial, unpredictable external metrics like the validation economy of social media is psychologically taxing and actively distorts our self-concept.
We are entirely aligned there. The distortion of the reference group is a major modern crisis.
However, we maintain our substantive disagreement on the mechanics of motivation. I maintain that external rewards inherently undermine our autonomy, while you argue they serve as necessary building blocks for competence.
Indeed. But there is profound value in understanding these psychological frameworks. Recognizing the difference between interjected and integrated regulation, or understanding our own locus of control, allows us to better navigate our motivations. It helps us understand why we react the way we do to the feedback of the world around us. And honestly, just talking through it makes the algorithm anxiety feel a little more manageable.
There is a certain peace in understanding the mechanics of our own minds. There is certainly more depth to explore in the source material, particularly regarding how these theories of motivation and control apply across different cultural and socioeconomic contexts. The balance between internal agency and external reality shifts dramatically depending on where and how an individual lives.
But we will leave that exploration for another time.
We will. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. We leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion.